What's going on, guys? So last month I created those new village buildings. This month I started working on proficiencies and creating new assets for the town. First off, proficiencies will be displayed in the main UI along with inventory, quests, and achievements. In total, there'll be 9 different proficiencies with 10 total levels. Each level will grant the player a permanent perk bonus. Cooking XP will be gained by crafting consumable items. Consuming these items will grant temporary attribute buffs such as strength, agility, intellect, luck, or charisma, depending on the type of food. Increasing your cooking proficiency will unlock perks such as increased food sell value or longer buff duration. Crafting XP will be gained by crafting any non-consumable items. This includes storage items such as chests or more class-specific items such as explosives for mining, fences for ranching, sprinklers for farming, etc. Farming XP will be gained by harvesting player-grown crops, and perks include crop sell value, increased duration on fertilizers and compost, and increased crop growth speed. Fishing XP will be gained by catching fish as well as collecting from fish traps. Fishing perks include increased fish sell value and increased chance of catching treasures when fishing or in fish traps, as well as reduced chance for fish to fight when on the line. Foraging XP will be gained by collecting wild berries, herbs, flowers, and mushrooms. This also includes items found from digging, which will require a new tool not yet seen, the shovel. Foraging perks include sell value increases on foraged items, increased yield upon harvest, and greater chance to find treasures or village hall collection items upon digging. Mining XP will be gained by destroying rocks and ore veins. Perks include increased yields, sell values, and chance to find gems from both stone and ore veins. Pet XP I combined. Originally I had ranching and pet separately, but I combined into one proficiency. So this will be gained by performing all pet and livestock related actions. Speaking to, petting, feeding, and collecting animal products such as eggs, milk, and wool will all gain pet XP. Perks include higher sell values on animal products, faster bond gains with animals, and dog and cat perks may provide passive companion bonuses to the player, such as increased charisma or luck. Social XP will be gained by performing most interactions with NPCs. Speaking to NPCs, completing quests, and giving gifts will all grant XP. And social perks will include shop discounts, increased sell values to vendors, and faster bond gains with NPCs. Woodcutting XP will be gained by cutting down trees. And perks include increased wood yields, increased chance of drops/random events when shaking trees, and increased growth speed for player planted trees. So after creating the proficiency XP bar and organizing the UI, I decided to shift to more 3D modeling. This time my focus is on creating interactable objects for inside the tavern and the beach. For the tavern, I thought a stylized wooden slot machine would be fun and would fit into the visual theme of the tavern. So I first modeled the slot machine in Blender, textured it, and then animated the buttons as well as the lever. I originally animated the reels in Blender, but after programming the slot machine and reel rotations in Unity, it worked better animating the reels separately in Unity. I created the slot machine script to randomize the reels and then pay out gold based on 6 possible 3-of-a-kind wins: cherries, lemons, apples, oranges, watermelons, and finally 7s are the jackpot. I adjusted the probabilities to ensure that each fit the awarded multiplier. So for example, 3 cherries or 3 lemons are more common to get than that of oranges or watermelons. I ran the simulation probably 1,000 times and the payout was about 90%, more than the 75% slot machines usually pay out. I then made a model of a piece of old parchment with the payouts nailed to the slot machine. I thought this looked pretty cool, but my favorite part was creating a gold coin, then adding physics to it. So whenever the player wins, coins will shoot out of the slot machine, and I'm really excited for players to try this out once they enter the tavern. Next, I decided to make something interactable and rewarding for the beach, which also fits into the restoration theme of the game. When the player arrives at the beach, it will be littered with cans, plastic bottles, and other trash visitors have left behind. Some quests will be related to beach cleanup, but I don't want the player to be left with an inventory full of useless junk. So even better than useless junk is useful junk. That's where I thought it would be fun to create a reverse vending machine for the beach called the recycle machine. Once this machine is fixed, the player can trade in old junk they find through foraging, digging, and fishing. for recycle tokens. These tokens can then be traded in at the recycle machine to acquire unique recycled items a player would not be able to obtain anywhere else. These include wearable equipment, which will grant attribute buffs when worn, items for the village hall collections, crafting materials, and possibly a couple of quest items. After creating these two machines, I decided to shift gears to the town once again. I always envisioned the town having some kind of cobblestone or stone-like floor. However, I could never figure out how to make a seamless texture to make this work. I spent hours on this in the past, but I always ran into issues like having trouble making it 100% seamless, or on the flip side it became too grid-like or just looked terrible in general. I was putting this off for so long, so I forced myself to make a quality texture for 2 whole days. I started simple with a 4-square grid to ensure it was 100% seamless. Then within the grid I started drawing various shaped blocks. However, once I reached the outside border I realized it wasn't seamless anymore. So I began drawing straight lines across the texture to ensure they began and ended in the same location. I then edited each to ensure it was 100% seamless again. After this I felt the lines were way too thick and I wanted the stone blocks to be more like stylized rounded pavers. This looked pretty good except that the depth of the cracks and space between the pavers were still too uniform. I used the airbrush tool in GIMP to thin them out and the dodge burn tool to darken certain crevices between the pavers. I was very happy with this, but still wanted to take the texture a bit further by adding different color shades, cracks, smudge marks, etc. I used the color picker tool and airbrush to add a little bit of purple hue to the gray color. I then drew in some cracks and smudges with other brushes within GIMP, then used the cloning tool with different opacity levels to apply similar effects to various pavers. I then added lighter edges around the pavers to make them look a bit more worn. And finally I used this texture in Unity with the terrain texture tool to start painting the town floor. It was fun to see how great this texture looked on a larger scale, so I excitedly began creating more town models in Blender to see how they looked on this new floor. I created a stylized wooden bench with stone supports. I loved creating the initial model, beveling the edges to smooth them out, then using the proportional editing tool to bend the wood and stone into a more stylized look. I then texture painted everything by hand, similar to the process I used to create the village structures last month. Once complete, I placed a few in the town, but the gray color I used was very dull compared to that of the new floor. I realized that I should have used a similar color palette, but this is an area I'm still very inexperienced in. So my next goal was to create a unique fountain for the center of the town with the same stylized modeling and texturing techniques. However, this time I added an additional step of taking a few swabs of the color palette I used on my seamless paver texture. I also checked the hue, saturation, and brightness values to see which elements led the bench from looking so out of place versus the stone floor. I realized I had overly saturated the wood color, and that tended to be the main focus when looking at the scene as a whole. In addition, the stone in the seamless texture had more of a bluish or purplish hue than brown or gray. Upon Googling it, it added a bit more depth and warmth to the dull and harsh, pure gray color. I did my best to model a fountain and then texture it solely based on the pre-planned color palette. Although not perfect, a little bit of color theory learning did help me make the town assets look much more cohesive. In addition, the models and textures I've created are a million times better than ones I've created even a year ago. However, before going further, I really need to deepen my understanding of how to properly pick a town color palette for not only the assets but also for the trees, grass, sky, etc. Not to mention how they'll look in the day-night cycle. In any case, I'm extremely happy with my progress so far, and for the next month I'm definitely going to do a deep dive into learning color theory and color schemes. I want a bright, saturated, warm, stylized world without clashing dull or oversaturated colors, similar how many Nintendo games are. So that's the goal for February, and I'm excited to see what the town looks like next month. As always, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you guys in next month's devlog.